Hey everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we have Swami Khecaranatha and he is here talking about the teacher-student relationship. So welcome.
Thank
I'm going
you.
to call
Happy
you
to be
Nada
here.
G. Is that okay to call you Nada G?
Nanaji is my name.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to ask you about the nature of a student and teacher relationship when someone works with a guru or a teacher. How would you describe the nature of the relationship?
Well, I think the first thing that's important to understand is that uh, the relationship with a guru is one brought to each person by God.
Hmm.
And in fact, I just read a wonderful quote yesterday by Paramahamsa Yogananda, and he says, "One can have many teachers in this lifetime, but there is only one guru, and that is the one that God chooses for you to take you into the light,"
Hmm.
which is a lovely quote. Guru means dispeller of darkness.
Hmm.
And I always make sure that people understand doesn't mean bringer of light, right?
Mm.
Because the light is always there. And so a guru's role, the relationship with a teacher, with a guru, is for somebody to provide you with the energy, nourishment, and guidance to find that light that's already within, to
Hmm.
find that that's already within.
Hmm.
And that is the single purpose of that relationship. Any other purpose that we project onto it or the teacher might project onto it is all fantasy.
Hmm.
And but the relationship with the true guru happens because of what's called Shaktapata, which means descent of grace. And that is really God descending into us in the sense that descending into the depths of our consciousness and saying, I am within you, find me.
Hmm.
And what happens is that simultaneous with that calling is connected with God saying, and I know you need a little help, right? So here's the help, right?
Hmm.
And then,
Hmm.
of course, there's different kinds of gurus depending on the type of tradition, but it primarily is a person who, through their consciousness, through their energy, through their guidance, through their support, perhaps a little cajoling, can lead us out of our own darkness and into the light.
Hmm. So the role then of the and you distinguish a guru from a teacher. You said that you can have many teachers, but there is only one guru. What did you mean by that?
Well, because particularly in non-dual tantric philosophy, it is understood that when grace descends, when that moment of God calling us happens, then in that same seed is the teacher,
Hmm.
is the particular energy field that we need to allow that longing that happens through that descent to to grow and manifest, right? And so you've probably heard, often you've heard the quote that says, "When the teacher's ready, when the student is ready, the teacher appears," right?
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it's really saying that there is a specific energy field that you need in order to reach your liberation, right?
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
wonderful thing about it is it begins to take out all this. It's this is not online shopping. Well, I'll try this guru for a while or that guru for a while, right? And it's also in the sense that 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 higher knowledge in us knows specifically what we need within ourselves,
Hmm.
and it almost always, I shouldn't say almost, it correctly brings us to the right teacher.
Hmm.
To, yeah. So
So there's been and I've talked to you about this before. Big Country, where this recent series of 5 segments talking about Osho, who is a very controversial character,
right.
and the people within the ashram that his followers. And so at the time, I'm sure they felt, I don't know if he was a dispeller of darkness, if he saw his role as that. And I don't really know if people who followed him really thought about their higher knowledge. So how does one know? So you look at that particular instance, and there are some people who I know that followed Osho that got what they needed out of it amidst this chaos and awful things
Right.
that have happened, and some people who are burnt. There's all these different types of
Sure.
people.
Of
How do
course.
you know that your higher, that all the things that you said are true? So look at the example of Osho. Let's assume that people who were there went because they felt like he was the dispeller of darkness, and that they knew at some level because there they were living in the ashram. How does one know that the teacher is right for them?
Uh, on one hand, it's a mental thing to ask that question, right? Uh, my advice is if you come into the presence of someone that truly opens your heart, right, then follow that. Open your heart, and but always be aware that the single purpose of that relationship is in service to you, right?
Mm,
And as long as there's truly an authentic service to you, then you can only benefit from that. At
mm,
some point, if you begin to see that that service isn't really being offered, that perhaps there's some self-service happening, if you start, and you can, it's important to look at the community as well, the community around a
mm,
teacher, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
As you said, and I don't really like to comment about situations like that, but some people probably received tremendously there. Other people perhaps were abused, and I think the bulk of the people just got off, right?
Right.
And uh, so you have to have the consciousness to not doubt, but to ask the question to yourself, am I truly being served? But just as importantly, what part of me is being served? Right?
Mm,
If
mm,
I'm just getting all jacked up and having a groovy time and taking my clothes off, etc., you know, yeah, that feels good and etc. But is that really truly bringing me to some kind of spiritual realization, right?
mm,
And those are so it's never to go blindly behind somebody, right?
mm-hmm.
But always be crystal clear in ourselves what it is that we want in this life and whether a particular guru or teacher is helping us to find that, right?
Mm,
And
mm-hmm.
if they're helping you to find it, then use that person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not, then move on, right?
Right. Or maybe
And
it could be that different times in your life you want different things to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. In the case of the Osho situation, it could be that, and what I understand from my own friend who was in the Osho, there are a lot of like freedom of your sexuality and all those things, and maybe that is what they needed to explore at that time. I mean, who
well,
knows?
perhaps at least they enjoyed exploring it, right? Right.
That's
But
true.
look, I don't say that in a disparaging way, but freeing yourself from inhibited sexuality has nothing to do with spiritual freedom.
Mm,
Spiritual freedom has to do with freedom from limited dualistic consciousness.
mm,
Not any kind of trauma, not any kind of inhibitions, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's really part of the real challenge, that you see that happens so often is people get off, and I say that with respect in one sense, but or they find that you know this person treats them better than their daddy did, right?
mm-hmm.
And so it's always
So they're going for psychological reasons, not necessarily
exactly.
spiritual
Yes.
reasons.
And
Ah.
spiritual liberation has nothing to do with healing. I piss
Ah.
people off all the time when I say this.
Wait, spiritual freedom has nothing to do with healing. And why do you think people get pissed off? What do they want to
Well,
hear?
because what most people want is they perceive something to be wrong with themselves, right? Either now or because of some previous reason, and they want to be healed. They want to be released from that suffering. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Go to a psychiatrist, go to a somatic training if that's what you want to release. And I'm not saying that healing doesn't take place in the process of spiritual awakening, right? But what if you want to say something's being healed, it's the misunderstanding that we suffer. The misunderstanding, and it's only our perception of separation from God that causes suffering.
Mm.
There's lots of pain in this life,
Mm.
right? There's a profound difference between pain and suffering.
Ah,
Most
okay.
people want to end their pain. They call it suffering. And I'm not saying that pain, and being abused and et cetera, isn't a lot of suffering, but the true source of our unhappiness is the lack of connection to that permanent joy within us.
Okay, got it. So let me see if I got this. So, for example, I may go to you because I have PTSD or I have been, sexually abused as a child, and I'm like, I
Right.
need you to heal me, and so I can be one with divine. And so
Yeah.
you would say, no, this is not the contract.
Well,
Is that
I don't generally say anything, right?
okay?
But and I look, people come into my presence, I generally know exactly their story without them telling me, right? And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, whatever the story is or whatever the pain is. If you come and sit in front of me, I focus on the part of you that does not need healed.
Mm,
I focus on the same God within you that I found in myself.
mm, mm-hmm,
And
mm,
God does not need healed, right?
mm, mm.
As we come in contact with that in ourselves, then if it's truly we find that at our core, then it's a little bit like just a dead leaf that falls off the tree. It just naturally falls off. And look, some people are more buried under their trauma of this lifetime or previous lifetimes or a combination, etc. And so that kind of uncovering, falling away has to happen. And often in coming in contact with a true, authentic spiritual teacher, then our buttons get pushed. We have insights. Oh, I was abused as a child. I was an abuser in a previous lifetime. I'm not denying that any of that, all of that takes place, right? The fundamental problem with 99% of the people on the planet who say who want a spiritual life is they want to be fixed.
Mm,
Only
okay.
the only thing that needs to be fixed is our understanding.
Okay, got it. So here's what I'm getting. You're not my psychotherapist. You're not my body healer. Like if I'm like, Nada G, like my back hurts. You're not going to be like, I see it from a past life.
I ain't your buddy, I ain't your daddy.
You're not my daddy. You're not my friend. You're not my daddy. You're not my psychotherapist. You're not the repairman. Fundamentally, you come with a philosophy that you're perfect as is, and if you could just see what I see, which is the perfection within you, then a lot of these other things will, like you said, just drop like a dried out leaf. So that's
Yeah,
your role.
fundamentally, yes. And even if they don't drop off, then it's like having a hangnail. Well, yes, it's there, but we don't get so caught in it that it takes us away from finding the real truth in ourselves. And when we find that truth, there may be profound insight into the trauma we've experienced or the trauma we've created, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that may be part of the revelation that's happened, and maybe some change is required in ourselves, right? Particularly if we are creating trauma for others, right? Right. But spiritual freedom is about one thing, and that is the discovery of the God within ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so often, people are wanting to wade through the manure to find that, right? And this is wrong with me, and that's wrong with me, and this, and I don't deserve, and this is all part of the human psychology, right? We're not trying to fix our human psychology. We're trying to find our own divinity.
Mm. So if I go in and say, so the teacher relationship is not one of a psychologist. So if I went in and said, and here's what was very confusing to me, and I mean no disrespect to, is it Amaji, the hugging gal? I can't, hugging
Yeah,
gal,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
So I went to her event a couple years ago, and it was very off-putting and confusing to me because I ran into a guy, and I said, so how long have you been following? I was kind of, not intentionally, but I have an investigative reporter kind of
Sure.
mentality. So I talked to one guy, and he said, Amaji is the only one where I've ever felt love. And
Hmm.
I thought, that's interesting. And I thought, wow, well, I can see that if you've never had love, that this is the one place where you can feel unconditional love. That's a beautiful thing. But then
Sure.
I felt a little bit confused about that. Because, so the only way you can feel loved is to go to these sessions and see her face to face. So that confused me. I then met another gentleman who he had, he had a tattoo with his given Hindu name. I can't remember what it was.
Right.
And his daughter also was given the name. And he said, I used to be a travel guide taking people on adventures, and I was told that instead, I should be change my occupation, and now I'm a photographer or something like that. And I said, so you were told this, so you just did it? And he said, yeah. And I said, so did you have any question? Like, how did that happen? And he said, well, his understanding, whether I don't really know, right? But his understanding is that Amaji told him he should change his profession. He should name his child this particular thing, down. And I don't know what other kind of prescriptive thing she said in his life. And I thought, I feel troubled by this. Is that, is it dependent on the guru, the kinds of things? Like, is that within scope of a guru? And what,
Why not? Look, a guru has insight, right? And so, if somehow some insight that one particular career is not really serving that person, and they suggest do this differently, then fine. You know, when I met Rudy, of course, this was 1971. We were all these uh, crazy hippies, five eyes going in 10 directions, couldn't work a day in our life, etc. And he demanded that we all get jobs. He sent most people to college. He didn't send me. He realized this guy ain't smart enough to go to college, right? Uh, but the point was, there was clarity on his part that the kind of profound lack of value and discipline that we had in our lives, coming out of the whole, all love hippie phase, drug thing, was didn't serve us and provided no capacity within us to really receive what was available from him, right? So
mm,
teacher says, look, get a job, and you get a job, and again, you have to you know, if he would have said, get a job and give me all your money, that's a different situation, right?
right.
So, if the guru's advice is truly serving you, then follow it.
But
Absolutely.
how do you know? So how do you know if, so let's say that I said, well, did you like being a travel guide? He's like, I loved it. It was my dream job. And I said, so do you like being a photographer? And he said, well, it's okay. And so I just thought, what? I don't.
Well, but look, the thing is that whether you like something or you don't like something, it isn't necessarily the correct measure, right? Perhaps there was in being a photographer, there was some profound distraction or a tour guide that was creating some distraction for him in his life that
Mm,
she realized was the case, and so she suggested something where there would be less distraction. I certainly
Yeah,
can't
we don't
comment.
know what the situation. So, is it more like of a don't tell, don't ask, like don't tell, don't ask? So, like if you don't want to change your occupation, don't go asking your guru about what do you think, Nanaji? What do you think
Well,
about
I mean,
this occupation, or is it something
yeah,
that
I
it's
mean, yes. I mean, yeah. If you don't want to know, then don't ask. I'll tell you a really interesting example. This was a long time ago. I had a student who lived here in Berkeley, practiced with me regularly. You know, a wonderful student. You know, we had a great relationship, and she was some kind of brilliant something, scientist something. But I mean, truly brilliant. Like, you know, maybe there were three in the world that could do what she could do. And so we lived in Berkeley, and she came to me one day and she said, you know, I've been offered this position in North Carolina, right? And, you know, explained what it was and the opportunity. And she says, so what should I do? I said, look, of course you must take that position, right? But I said, understand this. The relationship you have with me here is very different than the relationship you'll have with me if you move away, and will require much more profound clarity and discipline on your part to sustain this relationship. But fine, know that and go do that, right? So about 6 months she moved away and I hadn't really heard her. And about 6 months later she called me up and she was irate because she said, you know, I came to you and I asked your advice on what to do, and you didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. She said, I wanted you to say, no, stay here.
oh,
Right.
okay.
And I said, well, that's, you didn't say, tell me, you know, what I want to hear. You're asking me my advice, right? She says, in leaving you, I left the only thing that ever made me happy.
Oh,
And I said, look, I told you that in order to sustain that connection to that thing that makes you happy would require tremendous discipline. Well, as we talked a little bit, it became clear she didn't keep up her practice, right?
mm,
And yet, so then, you know, she asked me for advice. I gave it to her, you know, with some clear instructions. She didn't follow that advice, really. I mean, she went, right? But she didn't really follow the full advice, and so she wanted to blame me that she was now miserable.
mm,
It's the nature of the relationship. It's the nature of students always blame the teacher, right?
mm.
But this is it's fine, you know. But a teacher can't not give advice, or because they're afraid that the student's gonna not like what they want to hear, or even not follow it, right?
Hmm. So how I think I have the answer, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So I have my own internal advice, which I assume is filled
Right.
with egoic confusion and doubt, and then there's advice from you, who's just like a clear channel. Um, but how do I know that your advice is better than my advice?
You don't.
Okay.
But look, you know, this comes up all the time. Oh, I want to listen to my inner guru.
Yeah.
And I say 100% correct. Just make sure you're listening to the guru and not to yourself. Make
Mm,
sure you're listening to that inner guru and not yourself, not
mm,
your ego, right?
mm.
And then fine, you know. And some people come to me, oh, I've been following the advice of my inner guru. You know, I look at them, they're an absolute wreck, and I say, well, how well has that been working out for you?
Mm.
So, you know, look, it's always a delicate balance of consciousness, right? And there's no reason, look, you want to become a master violinist, right? You don't go to the teacher and then every instruction they give you, you say, screw that, I don't want to do that, I can't do that, that's not right. You follow the instruction and you see if it serves you, right? And just because, you know, uh, you do something for 6 months and it hasn't exactly worked the way you think it ought to work, doesn't mean it wasn't the right instruction,
Mm.
right?
So we talked about the role of a teacher, roles and responsibilities, right? I'm like a therapist. I'm not your repairman. I'm not, I basically am just going to have you focus on the God within you and dispel the light.
Yeah, my role is to perpetually turn you back inside.
Right. Okay. So my role as a student then is to
Perpetually go inside.
okay, that's my only responsibility. But then you're like,
Well,
CJ, go
no,
jump off
no,
a
no,
bridge or
no.
something. Am I supposed to like blindly go, okay, I'm gonna do
No,
it?
it's not your only responsibility.
Okay.
That's your first responsibility.
Okay, go on the inside.
Then,
Yep.
then it's to have the discipline and the consciousness to not just be inside, but to become still and to listen and to allow growth to show itself. And in that showing of growth, then we go through some challenges and we go through some misunderstandings and we may even go through moments of doubt, right? You know, if we truly want, then we hold on to what we want and we don't get caught in all the reasons, etc.
Okay, so my job is to have discipline, which I assume when I hear that, there's the discipline of following an instruction, like the directions that you gave to the gal that moved to North
Right.
Carolina. So you asked her to be disciplined, and she's gonna have to really like roll into doing that. So it's like the discipline to follow the instruction, the
Yeah,
discipline to do the meditation,
correct.
not just on the cushion, but
Yeah,
off the cushion as
of
well,
course.
right?
Yeah.
No, she couldn't do open eye transmission because you weren't doing online stuff at that time. But I assume that that's like sit and
The
do the discipline of
connection
sitting.
was already made. All she had to do was sit down, close her eyes, and ask, and I would be there, right? Because the connection is always there,
Okay.
right? Yeah.
Okay. So then that's the discipline. Be still. I assume means like get rid of all the garbage that's filtering through your head. Like I
Yeah.
need
Don't
to. I have to. She's better. I'm better. Those kind of things.
exactly. Be centered in your heart, and when all the circus drama around you, flares up, you just don't get caught in it, and you don't follow it, right?
And then listen. So it's listening to whatever guidance comes up, and then allow allow the growth to show itself. Which does that? I think that means I'm translating that to be patient. So I'm like, Nana G, it's been 6 months. How come I'm not? And your answer would be
Yes.
allow the growth to show.
Yeah, exactly. But also be, you know, it's not exactly a measuring device, but check open, is your heart open every day? Is the hope more open today than it was yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can't keep your heart closed for 3 months and then wake up one day and be pissed that it's closed.
Mm. So it's the Vimarsha, that being aware of,
Yeah,
yeah,
that
what is my
capacity
current state?
the capacity to know our own state.
Okay, so I have to be aware. Oh, yeah, that thing.
Oh yeah, we have to be conscious.
Oh, that's a lot to ask for
Damn.
me, not a G.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So, and then are there things that you help with in terms of, so I've seen lots of different teacher student models. I have a group that I hang out with, and so sometimes they ask like, what do you see with my energy? Am I, when I'm sitting down and meditating, what do you see is happening? Can you work with my energy? Is that all within the purview of appropriate boundaries with teacher student relationships?
Well, I mean, why not in one sense, but look, sounds really crude, but you take a bowel movement, you know, you pull the plug. You don't look back there and start trying to analyze what's there, what's not there, right? You just pull the plug,
Oh, you mean I
right?
shouldn't be doing that, not a G?
You shouldn't be doing that, right? And so this kind of drama, is my aura blue, is it yellow, is this, can you see my energy? This is all superficial nonsense, right?
Mm,
We know in ourselves. We don't have to ask somebody or have somebody verify whether our heart is open and whether we feel a connection to our deepest self.
mm,
All, people wanting to this, that is just, that's just ego. Oh, can you tell how spiritual I am? Or can you
Mm.
tell how spiritual I'm not today? Right? That's just drama. It's just individual superficial story instead of just being quiet, being aware, being connected to ourselves, and knowing whether we're open or closed, knowing
Mm.
whether we can feel that energy in ourselves. If we're
Mm.
not open, open. If we can't feel the energy, do the work to feel the energy, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, what I love about your work is it's very simple. It just boils down to three of those things that you just mentioned, right? And other practices, there's a long litany of like jhanas and practices and like, each jhana has these like six prescriptive things that should happen. And
Yeah, look, some people may find that valuable. I don't really, but my simple formula is open your heart, surrender to the Shakti, and reside in consciousness.
hmm
Right?
yeah, regardless of what other the pyrotechnics that happen around it. So,
Yes.
so people were like, I went to Rudy and I saw like a blue sky and I saw like a burst of like stars and then his face turned purple and then there was a haze of like,
Look,
oh,
because energy has an effect, right?
right.
And when there's an energy shift, then you know, fine. So what, right? So what that the sky opened up, or Rudy turned blue, or I turned black, or I have a rainbow, or this or that. It's so what, right? We're because all of that is us looking in the world for some confirmation of something that we think we should be knowing in ourselves already.
Because in a lot of ways, what I'm asking is that right, Nadaji? Should I be seeing a purple haze? Should I
Right.
be, is there a rainbow color? Is that right? Am I
Yeah.
right? Can I,
Yeah.
if I'm not, can you fix me? Because if I go back to the underlying, why does someone care about these pyrotechnics? It's
Right. Yeah.
because there's a fun, and I care about the pyrotechnics, and I'm not above any of that. Just to be
Right.
clear, I
Right.
mean I'm curious about that. I've asked you, Nadaji, what's my energy look like? I've asked all these kinds of questions before because I'm curious. But what I'm hearing is underlying all of that is a spiritual truth that that person is forgetting, which is that
Exactly.
you're
Yeah.
fine, everything is great, don't focus on the purple and the sky. That's beautiful. If you experience that, that's fine. If you don't experience, also
It's,
fine.
yeah, because it's ultimately meaningless whether you do or you don't.
Hmm.
Do you, is your heart open? And I meaning, are we inside ourselves? Are we feeling that simple gratitude and humility and joy that is within each of us? Because that's the foundation that in which true spiritual liberation grows from.
Hmm.
All of the other is just gymnastics.
Okay. All right. All right. So, I think I've covered almost all of my questions. Let's see. Um, so, what is so? My husband and I were talking about this all morning. So, what's the difference between surrounding, knowing whether you are surrendering to divine will or guru's will? What's the difference? I mean, is the purity of the advice given based on how clear of a channel the guru is?
Yes, yes, but it's also has to be received in the purity of our own awareness, right? And look, there are thousands of gurus. There's real gurus, there's fake gurus, there's, gurus that are out to make money, etc., right? My advice is your heart opening? Are you truly turning within and making contact with some deeper part of yourself, right? And if so, then use that. If not, then ask yourself two questions. Is it because that is not what's being provided here, or I'm not doing the work in myself,
Mm,
right?
mm, right. So, right. So, you would say a guru who says, now, because you said, and I've heard in previous MP3s that you've talked about gurus in India where it's like, yes, you can participate, and here's what there's like a tithing kind of
Yeah, right.
scenario, just like the Mormons, where it's just like, yes, you're a Mormon, but a good Mormon has to tithe a certain percentage of their income. So if a guru is like, here's the thing, you need to pay me money, and I will be your guru, is that what are your thoughts on that kind of relationship?
Well, I mean, look, I've taught for 50 years. I've never charged once for a class.
Mm-hmm.
I I charge for retreats because they have an expense associated with them, right? Feed, food, etc. When I moved to Berkeley, I've been here 18 years. The first 7 years, I lost money on every retreat
Mm.
because I was providing not just the retreat, but the food, the rental of the stuff, and people couldn't afford. I never turn people away because they don't have money, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the money, right? Some people say, well, if you don't charge, they have no value. My experience is they don't have value, but they don't have value, right? But my point is, my class, which happens 2 or 3 times a week, I never nor will I ever charge for those, right? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do. I have enormous financial pressure on me because of the building we own here, stuff, and living in Berkeley, you know. But I don't bring that into the equation, right? I have a day job to help take care of that stuff, right? That's my responsibility. And I live with that responsibility so that I can provide the possibility of some true, authentic exchange, right? So I'm not saying that paying for something is inherently bad, right? You have to be just cognizant of it. And, some people charge money and that doesn't make them inauthentic, at all, right? Uh, you know, but any guru that asks you for something that they don't really need, you have to be suspect of that,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Mm. Well, I know in Osho, I have no idea if he needed the Rolex watches and the
Well, I can't
Mercedes.
imagine why, but you know, but and who knows? And look, you know, who knows what the dynamic of that? My overall cut on it is was just a lot of people getting off,
Right.
and I say that with respect to the people who truly maybe receive something there, right? But uh, and look, energy is energy, right? Even even uh, some guru may have lots of energy, right? And you may be able to receive some energy from them, right? So fine, take the energy, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily an enlightened person or that that person can lead you to the light, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
What is it that you want from a relationship with the teacher?
Mm-hmm.
My suggestion is if you want to know God and you believe a teacher or guru can help you, then engage in that relationship. There's no other reason.
Mm-hmm.
And if any guru starts telling you there's some other reason, run away.
Right. Right. If you're like, oh, I'm going to help you heal all your traumas and wounds, as
Pay
the
me,
primary
pay me
directive.
$10,000, I'll heal you.
Right.
Right?
Or,
Exactly.
or like someone who says that if you want to be part of my teachings, then we need to meet monthly so I can actually track your spiritual development, and that's going to
I mean,
cost money.
maybe that's real. Maybe it's authentic. I don't know. Each person has to really have the awareness to 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 be aware of every relationship they're involved with, and certainly with a spiritual teacher, where there's perhaps a lot of energy and a lot of power, and this, it's that. So it's always about being conscious. And unfortunately, particularly when we're young, we don't have a lot of capacity to be conscious,
Right.
right? But you
So
know,
so here you are in Berkeley. You have a high rent, you have a day job, and then you're doing all these spiritual teachings and retreats and giving of yourself so fully. Um, how come you don't charge? I guess I'll ask the other question because you need to live and have and feel comfortable and feel secure in your
Look,
retirement?
I eat well, my health is fine. What else do I need money for? And look, as I said, I charge for retreats because yeah, we have a big mortgage here and stuff, and so from that perspective, I have. But I don't require people come to retreats, right? That's fine. You know, we go to Hawaii. You've been there. We rent this place that's ungodly expensive, right? So I have to charge for that, right? But you know, fundamentally, what I'm trying to offer people is on an ongoing basis a a an energy field and guidance where they can perhaps truly achieve something wonderful in their spiritual life.
Hmm.
And that's my responsibility and my duty and my honor. And you know, I wouldn't do it if I had to charge to do it
Hmm. Hmm. Okay,
because
that
yeah.
helps a lot. All right, so we talked about money. You talk about a fake guru. So I'm assuming that by definition, a fake guru is not there, as you said, they're not there to truly serve you. They're not there for your spiritual freedom. They're maybe there for their own egoic reasons, which is what are some things that a fake guru, what other kind of signs would you look for?
You know, are they reinforcing their ego or are they, you know, freeing themselves from their ego? All right.
Hmm. Hmm.
And look, if we just open our eyes, step back a few feet, it's easy to see. Now, often people don't want to see or they don't care, and that's fine. Whatever, people make their choices, right? Right. But the fundamental question you have to ask yourself is, am I truly receiving something here that's allowing me to discover the highest in myself? And if so, then that's a real service. You may not like the guy or person. They may be a jerk. They may not. They may this. They may that. That's not relevant.
So I was listening to some of your MP3s and your talking or conversations you've had, and you talk about Rudy, and he would sometimes get mad at people, and or where you may think, well, that's an abusive relationship. That's not in my highest service, so I'm out of here. So how does one know? Because sometimes what may be for your highest service doesn't feel like it's for your highest
Yeah.
service.
So perhaps there has to be some introspection on the part of yourself. Yeah, I didn't really like that, but what part of me didn't like it and why? Right.
Mm,
Look,
mm,
a guru's job is to free you from your ego.
mm,
They free you from your ego by helping you get in contact with the quote the non-ego in you, right? But sometimes the ego, all the time, the ego, is usually so strong in people that sometimes it takes a little bit of cutting through, right?
mm.
And some teachers are much more intense about that cutting through, right? And than others, and that's a little bit style. I
Hmm.
trust that universal force to do the work and to cut through whatever it needs to cut through in a person.
Hmm. So is that like so? For example, I interviewed Susan Chomsky, who has followed Maharishi. She wrote this book, Maharishi and Me, and she retells a story about how she was like Maharishi's kind of personal assistant, and there was like a big gathering of which she did a whole bunch of work for Maharishi. And Susan, sorry if I get the story slightly wrong, but the gist of it is she did a whole bunch of work for him, and then he said a very degrading thing about her in this audience, like, oh, my personal assistant just did a horrible job. And so here she had like poured her heart and soul into this thing,
Right,
and he just defamed, hit her, did a huge ego hit. And she just felt she was just like internally crushed. And
right.
so do you think that when a teacher does that, they're consciously going, because as you said, you see the horrors of it all. You probably, see CJ has this particular pattern, whatever. And so what she needs to do for her ego to release is perhaps, take her couple down, or Susan, whatever. I may need to take her down a couple of notches so
Yes,
that,
but look, most people do in order to somehow prove that they're important. So I'll tell you a story.
okay.
Uh, when this was while Rudy was still alive, and I had moved from Bloomington to Lafayette, Indiana, and I started my own ashram, and then I lived there, for a while, and then I invited him to come, and he, came, so we set a date, right? And, look, I was 21 or something at the time, but I picked him up at the airport. I drove him to this house, and I had maybe 15 or 20 people living with me, right? And I showed him around the downstairs. And as we're walking up the stairs to the second floor, he's in front of me, and he turns around and he says, "Where's the body?" And I said, "Where's the body?" And he says, "All I see is ego. That you're bringing me your ego. Where's the body?" Meaning, where's the surrender? Where's the sacrifice? Right?
Wow.
You're showing me this, how important you are and how great you've built this ashram and
Mm,
all this stuff. And believe me, I turned to dust. And it was so powerful
yeah.
because what he recognized wasn't the inner opening that had taken place, but the facade of importance that I had created around me, right? And even in my preparation for him to come there,
Mm,
I'll guarantee you that every time I saw Rudy after that, I handed him a bag of, of dust and bones, right?
mm,
Because,
mm.
so that was a very, in one sense, at the moment, it was like so powerful. It just cut right through me, right? But the insight, was, you know, hey, you're just building your ego here. Surrender,
Mm,
you know. And
mm,
so, so often our relationship with teachers, we want to be the special one, right?
mhm.
And, you know, if you start seeing people who are the special ones, be really suspect in that situation.
Mm. Yeah,
But most of them have to be suspect. I want to be the special one, and
right,
people do crazy things in order to become the special one,
right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, they have the whole Sheila scenario, who was the
Uh,
person in the whole Osho ashram, and she was like the head commander, who was like his surrogate, all those kinds of things.
Well,
And
and even in probably every student, they're so much of the time trying to become the one, trying to become special, trying to, etc. And look, it's human nature in one sense, but it's a fundamental flaw of understanding.
right,
So any guru that really builds into that is only supporting, reinforcing that instead of freeing them from that.
right, right. There's no teacher pet scenario here.
No.
Okay. All right. The last question, and I think this relates to the thing that we were just talking about. You had said earlier on that community is really important, and so if you're in a community where you see like, oh, those are the teachers' pets, like that's kind of
Right.
a question mark because really there should be kind of. But then, how do you know if that person's a teacher's pet, or if in fact like that person, you're saying something to turn that person into bones and dust because you love them and that's what they need at that juncture, and or and
You may
actually,
not. You
okay,
may not know.
okay,
In some one way, it's irrelevant, right?
okay,
Right. Look, any any situation, any community, spiritual community, political community, you can really see very clearly whether there's a quote inner circle, right? And most people that are outside the inner circle are pissed off because they're not in the inner circle,
right,
right?
right,
You know. And yet, that's
Absolutely.
what's that all about, right? That's somehow needing some validation of our own self-worth because we're important.
Yeah, so I get it. So, in some ways, I think that's our human nature, right? That's our ego that
Yeah,
says, I want, there's a part of me that wants to connect, I want to belong. And then not only do I want to connect and belong, I want to be special, right? That's kind of our ego
yeah,
driven. And so,
well, yes.
yeah, so that is going to happen just by the nature of being in groups. But that's not
Yeah.
happening from the guru's standpoint. It's like,
Well, let's hope not.
yeah. So if you start seeing like, oh, I see that person has the Sheila and all these people who are like their favorite, that's kind of a little like a red flag, I think, for
Yeah,
me.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So those are the kind of community things that you would be looking at and what's
Pay
happening.
attention to. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and so one thing that when I've talked to people in your community, they've been with you for like 13, 14, 20 years. It's not like a lot of these other communities, it's like they come and go. I'm here, I'm not there. I follow six teachers, but
Right.
most of the people who have are in your community, they've been there, like they're committed to you,
Yeah.
which I
Yes.
think means something about the community that one of the tests of the community, I think. Is that fair or is that like
Yes, of course. Yes, because as I said, one of the ways that you measure a teacher is to look at the community, right? And the people that have been around that person for some period of time, are they growing, right?
mm,
Have they grown, right?
mhm.
And you know, uh, I've done one practice all my life, and if Rudy was alive, I'd still be with him. I wouldn't be teaching; I'd be sitting at his feet, right?
Mm,
And there's nothing wrong with a lifetime relationship with a guru, right?
mhm.
If it's continues to serve you, then why not, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Blessings to you
You're
and
very
love.
welcome.
All right.
Thank